So wait, you can only do the tint to a certain extent based on the dimming that you're at?
Yeah, man, that's just like the definition of this light, is that there should be an asterisk on nearly every feature because it's all so dependent on other factors of the light. And I mean, maybe that's just what happens when you try to make something completely new. It's a weird one. It's a weird light.
But would you recommend it?
What's going on, everybody? It's Robert Holland. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about the Godox SZ150R, relatively new light that came out that is RGB on a COB, which is a chip on board LED light source, which there's not many of, so it's a very interesting light. Now, this light has a pretty familiar format. It looks like a lot of the other Godox lights in that, you know, we've got a large body here, just like the SL series and the VL series. We've got the big yoke of the VL series as well, but there is one very significant difference in this light, and that is up front right here. This is a diffusion that covers the chip on board. So the LED light source is actually in there, and then you've got this diffusion, and the reason for that is because there needs to be something in front of the chip on board to homogenize all the different LEDs back there, because this is bicolor, this is RGB. So you can make this any color temperature. But a big issue when you try to put different colored LEDs on this small of a light source is you start creating these weird shadow patterns with multicolored temperatures, and they're really jagged just because of the chip on board array. So Godox decided to solve that by just slapping a big old diffusion on it and adding RGB. This actually moves in and out a little bit, and that allows you to put a bit of modification on your light source, which is kind of something that is borrowed from your like smaller zoomable Fresnel style LEDs like the Godox S30. That is a zoomable LED, and we can do that here too. Let me turn this up so you guys can see it on the wall really well. So you see how it's a little bit brighter in the center, and then it evens out as we push it forward. So back here, the light gets deeper into the modifier. This is zoomed all the way back, and that's going to create slightly harder light. It's going to bounce off this reflector in a different way. And then as I zoom it in, it's going to even out a little bit more. Now, this is going to have different results in every modifier, right? This isn't going to have a huge impact if you're putting this in a softbox, but in a reflector or behind an umbrella, it's going to allow you to control it in different ways. Probably also has some interesting results with the Fresnel head, which I have not yet tried. And if you're seeing that and you're wondering, is that going to make a difference on power output? Well, here I've got it on full behind me, and I've got my Sekonic light meter out. So we will try it real quick. If you can't see that screen, we've got an f16 and 7/10, and that was zoomed all the way back. And now I've zoomed it all the way forward, so it is as close to the front of the reflector as possible. We'll do another test, and we've got f16 and 6/10 of a stop. So a small difference, but there is a difference, so it is gonna affect your output a little bit, and just keep that in mind. It might be a way to get a little bit of extra brightness out of it.
That would be modifier dependent, technically, right? Because it's still the same output, just how it's controlled, or?
Yes, exactly. So we're not actually adding or reducing light when we zoom it. We're simply shaping the light in a different way, concentrating the light into a different pattern. And as you can see on the wall, like that results in a more specular center on this reflector, but your results are gonna change depending on what type of modifier that you're using. I'm booming a boom. Okay.
Bada bing, bada boom boom?
Bada boom. All right, I wanna give you guys a quick guide to the back of this device, although I'll tell you why in a little bit. I don't recommend ever having to touch the back of this. There's a much better way to control it. So on the back, on the right-hand side, we've got our main dim control, and on the left side, we've got basically a function control. It'll control whatever other property of the light you're trying to control. Now I am on the CCT option, which is just color temperature. So I can go left or right here, to modify the color temperature of the light. We can go anywhere from 6500 all the way down to 2800 Kelvin. Okay, I'm just gonna show you guys live the CRI and lux and everything. We've got CCT at the top, that is the color temperature. We've got RA below that, and that is the color quality, the CRI average. Then down here, we've got lux, so that's the output value. And then we've got CCI right here, that is whether it has a green or magenta cast. So I'm gonna start off all the way at its lowest point of 2800 Kelvin, and we're really gonna brighten this up so that we're getting all the output out of it. Okay, so we've got 2778 Kelvin, 95.1 for the CRI average, a tiny bit of magenta cast, and 79,900 lux. We are a foot from the light source. And here you guys can see the entire CRI. Look closely down here at the R9. That is its lowest figure, 73.5, and that's a very important figure because that is the area that most skin tones are rendered. So this is not that great at accurately rendering skin tones, at least not at 2800 Kelvin, but its CRI overall is quite high. Now moving up to 5500K. So at 5500K, we have a color temperature of 5384, so it's a little bit short. 94.5 on the CRI, a little bit of a green cast, but 103,000 lux. Again, we're still at 12 inches. And for CRI, we have an R9 that has dramatically increased from the 2800 color temperature, but our average overall has dropped, which means we've lost color fidelity in some of these other areas. And now we'll go to the maximum of 6500K. Okay, all the way up at 6500K, we have a color temperature of 6243, so we've fallen even more short, and this is the maximum temperature on the light, 6500K, so you're only really getting about 6200 Kelvin out of it. We've got an RA CRI rating of 92.3 for the average, still very high lux. We were at 102,000, and no magenta or green cast at this color temperature, so it kind of moves around depending at what you're at. And if I go back to the spectrum here, the R9 has dropped off a little bit from the 5600 Kelvin, so R9 is best right around daylight white balance. And in general, this is about the worst color temperature for this light. The CRI is just really low in comparison to the others. Now, you guys may not have any frame of reference for the lux there. Those are all the lux ratings inside the reflector at 12 inches, so you can do some math to figure that out at other ratings. But if you just want a more general comparison, I did compare it yesterday to the VL300, which is not BiColor, it's not RGB, and it's a 300 watt LED instead of a 150 watt, but it's a very popular light source, and Godox definitely made a lot of waves with this light in particular, so I think it's a good comparison. The SZ150R at full power, at daylight white balance, is 2 1/3 stops less bright than the VL300. Now, one stop you would expect because it's a 150 watt light and this is a 300 watt light. So obviously this is gonna be, the SZ150R is gonna be less powerful than the VL300. But that other 1.3 stops completely comes from the diffusion, right? There's diffusion in front of the bulbs, that's going to decrease the peak output. This has no diffusion whatsoever, so it's just in a reflector, that's just raw power that you get out of there. It's completely unobstructed. So just know that part of it, that light difference just comes from the different style of bulb. So if you're looking for something really bright, this might not be the pick, right? You're still gonna be better off just going with a daylight balanced LED that doesn't have any compromises when it comes to power. The SZ150R is geared way more towards flexibility, having the BiColor, having the RGB options, having that adjustable bulb, right? It just gives you more options with a single light, whereas this is more like bang for your buck. I'm trying to put a lot of light on a situation.
Light on specifically the situation.
On the situation. Are you just gonna dump situation in there now?
Yeah, I am.
All right, if you look on the display here, you can see below the color temperature that we have up here, if I hit the function button in, we also have green and magenta, and that's because we've got RGB bulbs, so we've also got green and magenta modification. We can make this light more green or more magenta. Now, there's a caveat here. If you see right now, I've got it at -50 magenta, but the light is at 100% power. But as I start dimming the light, right around 50%, you see I'm losing the maximum amount of magenta I can modify. When I'm at a really low power, I've got virtually no magenta modification. And the same thing happens with the green. As I start dropping the power, interestingly enough, it happens later with the green, but as I get pretty low, I'm gonna start losing green. So my max of 50 goes away at like 10%, and then it starts disappearing. Which I imagine when you're using this light, you know, most of the time you're gonna have higher power outputs, but just be aware that you're going to lose that green and magenta control as you use lower intensities of light. Now, speaking of intensity of light, we also have to think about this light's intensity when we get into the RGB mode. So if I click HSI on the back here, I initiate the RGB mode for this light, and it's demonstrated on the back of the display with HSI, so hue, saturation, and intensity. So on the top, I've got my hue. If I hit the function button in, I've got the saturation level, how much that hue is saturated, and then I still have my intensity, which I can increase with the dimming switch. Now, you lose quite a bit of output when you go into the RGB mode. As we just saw, we had, I believe, what, 109,000 lux when we were at full power at daylight. Now, let's try, say, the color teal. This colorimeter doesn't know what the heck is going on because we've got an RGB light pointed at it now. So things like CCT and RA, it just doesn't even understand them.
Just for translation, over just means nah, fam.
Pass, we ain't telling you. So the important figure here though is 16,100 lux. Again, this is, the light right now is at full output, 100% brightness, and we are down to 16,100 lux. It's between 1/4 and 1/8 of the output that we were getting on daylight balance, which just means that this is between 2 and 3 stops less powerful. But it gets weirder because depending on the color, that lux value is gonna change quite a bit. So now we're down to 10,000 at purple. That means we're below 3 stops of light loss over daylight. And then I remember specifically when I was at the teal color, I actually had a rather bright reading. Yeah, look, 23,800. That is about 2 stops less than the other one. And you can tell what's happening here is now we've got CCT and we've got RA again. The reason is because some of the colors are able to use more of the BiColor LEDs than the other colors. So makes sense. A color like teal is probably able to use more of those blue LEDs that we're able to use for 6,500 color temperature. And here's a rating with orange. As you can see, respective to the other colors, we've got a pretty high lux value here, and that's simply because it's using orange, which means it can use a lot of the warm LEDs that are used to make 3,200 Kelvin temperature or 2,800 Kelvin temperature, right? Because of that, we're able to get this. And look at the color temperature here, 1760 Kelvin. So technically this thing can actually get a little bit lower than 2,800.
So if you're ever gelling a candle.
Gelling a candle orange. Now I wanted to show you how everything functions on the back, just so that if you got this and you got it right out of the box, you would know how the general function of this is. But I don't recommend ever touching the back of this light because you want to do something like change 100 degrees of hue or something like that. You're just going to be twisting these dials all day, right? So instead of using the back display to control everything, what I highly recommend is the new Godox Light app. Now I've made a dedicated video on this showing you all the control and options that you have from this, but just so you don't have to go watch another video, I'll show you guys the capabilities really briefly here. So right now, this light is my group A light here. So this is my on and off switch for it. And then if I tap on the light, I can go into any of the different options here. So if I want CCT, just to change the temperature, change the tint of the light, drop the intensity, you can do that here. I have RGBW, so I can just pick any color right here, and again, change the intensity. I have HSI, not much different from RGBW, but it's displayed in a different fashion. So we've got the 360 degrees as you move around, and then you've got the saturation value as you move closer to the center. Whichever one's more familiar for you. I actually like the HSI display as opposed to the RGBW. This does not have the gel filters like the TL60s do, but we do have the effects. So got all the different lightning and broken bulb and laser. These are pretty much standard, but it is pretty cool that unlike a BiColor LED with an RGB light, things like the laser effect or the party effect or the fireworks effects, they actually have a lot of saturation and hue variation to them. And again, you can also get effects like police car, fire truck when you're using a RGB LED. And that's really nice when you have it in a controllable format like a COB LED. And there is the color picker, which just is not that great. Like, do you see that? Like to eye, that looks magenta right there, but it's totally green. Like we have green here. That does not look like green right there. Yeah, this is hit or miss. This mode allows you to open up an image. Here, let's use this one.
No context needed?
No context needed, okay? So we got this picture and like, I see like, you know, a nice peach color, but what the light is showing me is that this point is like super purple. Can you see the back at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and like his stash, like this
His
light,
white stash.
his stash is still purple, right? If we get on his eyes, maybe we can get a little
Is it like
gorgeous
per
blue
pixel and it's just getting all the noise?
How about this orange right here? No, see, that's still pink. This color picker option, at least on this light, I feel like it works better on the TL60. It does not work that great here unless you're demonstrating like a blue or a very obvious green. But like when you get into other colors, I just feel like they're all too magenta. Okay, that covers all of the color options and light output tests and stuff, but let's just talk about some more general points about using this device. We've got a nice beefy yoke on the side here, and this does a great job. I've had some larger soft boxes on it, and it has no problem, provided you tighten it down well, at holding its position. It does have a little bit of that where you put a heavy modifier on and you lock it off in a position and then it sags like a millimeter or two, but it's not like your light is just gonna tip over once you have this thing tightened down. It holds its place really well, even with large modifiers. And there is a yoke on either side here. So if you just need to apply a little bit more general tightness here and then fine tune the tightness on this side, that way it can hold down those really heavy modifiers if you find that it's a little bit loose when you get it out of the box. I've pretty much stopped doing the fan noise test because all of these are right around 40 decibels when you have the decibel reader right over the light, which is practically nothing. Like, they're very quiet. Here's my lavalier microphone directly over top of it. You probably hear my neighbors at the tanning salon more than you hear the fan right now. And here it is directly below. So out of all the noises that are taking place right now, the road noise, the business next door, just outside ambience, even my AC going in here, all of those things are louder than this fan is, even though I'm right next to it. So very quiet fan overall, on par with all the more recent Godox products. There is no control box. All you've got is your power adapter. You've got a pretty long run, maybe 18, 19, maybe 20. I'm not exactly sure how long. I think this cable is right around 18 feet. It feels that just looking in my studio. Yes, there's a tape measure nearby, but
it's this long.
So if you had this 6 feet up on a light stand, then you can get this about 18 feet away from an outlet. So without a control box, that does mean that there is no out of the box V-mount compatibility. And if you wanted to use this on location at all, then you would have to find some way to battery power something that gives you an outlet so that you could then plug this in.
All the cool European reviewers would just say, you need a V-mount to mains adapter.
This isn't a massive modifier, but it's a 31 by 47, which I feel like is gonna be, appropriate for this type of light. I don't think anyone's gonna be putting an RGB light in something massive, and that's exactly what I was talking about here. So if I tighten this down in position, it's gonna hold it pretty well. Even if I shake it a little bit, holds its position, no problem, nice and level. And honestly, I didn't even really tighten it down, and I have not put any additional tension on the bolt on the opposite side yet, so I could tighten down the yoke on the other side as well, but haven't had to do that, and it works quite well. And take a look at this thing when it's in its HSI mode. If you've ever tried to gel a flash inside of a softbox, you would know that it's really hard to get a deep level of saturation. So to see that on the inside of a softbox and actually see that make it all the way to the front diffusion panel is just really cool. All right, final verdict on the Godox SZ150R. This is not a cheap light. It is $559, but there's also nothing else really like it on the market. There is nothing out there that is RGB that you can simply toss into any Bowens mount softbox. There are a few out there that do it with like different lights all positioned around, but nothing that does it with a single light source like a true COB would. So there's no negatives of its RGB functionality. Now, the only caveat to using this light is what I said earlier, is once you get into exploring its functionality, just realize that that output is going to be all over the place. But otherwise, so many features to this light. Being able to control the white balance with the BiColor feature, being able to adjust the tint through Magenta and Greencast, being able to slip into RGB, being able to use it with the app and have that control in such a fast-paced way. I just think that it is an excellent buy. It's still quiet. It's rather portable, provided you still have access to an outlet. You're going to need access to an outlet in order to use this. If all you're concerned about is brightness, then I think stick with the VL series, as that's just gonna give you more power per dollar with a daylight restriction only. All right guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on the SZ150R. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos, and make sure to click that bell to turn on notifications. Until next time, take it easy.